No clothes, no hope, no limits. The alien girl's sorrowful past, and the human who rewrote the stars, Zara, stood alone on the dusty, desolate surface of a forgotten planet, her ragged breath visible in the cold air. The wind howled around her, carrying with it the scent of the barren land. Her alien eyes scanned the horizon, but there was nothing, no sign of life, no promise of hope, just endless stretches of barren ground. She had been abandoned here, left by her own people to perish. Her skin, a pale shade of green that marked her as an outsider among her own kind, was exposed to the harsh elements. No clothes, no shelter, no protection from the unforgiving world. Zara had always been different, too weak, too fragile, too flawed. Her people had cast her aside when they saw she couldn't meet their standards, leaving her to face this harsh, lonely existence. Her body ached from the journey. The only thing that kept her moving was the faint hope that perhaps, somewhere, there might be something, or someone, that would show her kindness. She had traveled through countless worlds, each one more hostile than the last, all in search of something, anything that would tell her she mattered. But no one cared. She was nothing but a burden to the galaxy, a mistake, a reminder of what her race considered imperfection. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Weakness wasn't something she could afford. She had learned that the hard way. In the cold emptiness of space, there was no room for tears, only survival. She stumbled forward, her worn-out shoes scraping against the rocky surface. Her stomach growled, a constant reminder of the hunger that gnawed at her. She had found nothing to eat for days. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. That was when she saw him. A small ship appeared in the distance, its shape cutting through the thick clouds of dust that swirled in the atmosphere. At first, Zara thought it was another illusion, one of the many false hopes she had chased over the years. But this time it was. The ship was real, and it was heading in her direction. Her heart skipped a beat as the ship drew closer. She watched, frozen in place, as it descended toward the planet's surface. The ship touched down a short distance away from where she stood, its engines humming softly. The hatch opened and a figure emerged. He was human, a man tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that fell loosely over his forehead. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the briefest moment, Zara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The man took a cautious step forward, his gaze softening as he took in the sight of her. He didn't look at her with the disgust or fear that most others did. Instead, there was something else, a sense of curiosity, of compassion. Zara could hardly believe it. She had been rejected by her own people, but this human, he wasn't like them. He wasn't disgusted by her appearance. He didn't seem frightened by her alien features. Instead, he seemed to see her for what she truly was, a person. "Are you all right?" The man's voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days, but there was a warmth to it that immediately put her at ease. Zara didn't know how to respond. Her throat felt tight, the words stuck behind the barrier of pain and disbelief that had built up over the years. She wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, she just nodded weakly, too exhausted to do anything else. The man stepped closer, his eyes scanning her for injuries. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "I've got some food," he said, offering it to her. Zara hesitated. She hadn't had a meal in days, but the thought of eating, of trusting a stranger, filled her with dread. She had been abandoned before, left to fend for herself. She wasn't sure if she could trust this man, even though he seemed kind. But the hunger in her stomach was too strong to ignore. Slowly, she took the bundle from his hands, her fingers trembling. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of dried meat and some water. Her stomach growled again, louder this time, as she tore into the food, barely tasting it. She was too hungry to care. As she ate, the man watched her quietly, his gaze thoughtful. He didn't ask questions or try to fill the silence with meaningless words. He simply waited, allowing her to eat at her own pace. When she finished, she felt slightly better, but the emptiness inside her hadn't disappeared. It wasn't just hunger that gnawed at her. It was something deeper, something that no food could fix. It was the loneliness, the sense of worthlessness that had plagued her for as long as she could remember. "Thank you," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his expression softening. "I'm Marcus," he said. "I came to help." "You don't have to be alone anymore." Zara blinked, surprised by his words. "Help?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why would you want to help me?" Marcus looked down at her with a steady gaze, his eyes filled with an understanding she had never known. "Everyone deserves a chance," he said quietly. Even you. Those words hit Zara like a thunderclap. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was nothing, that she had no place in the world, that she didn't deserve help. But Marcus, he didn't see her as a mistake. He saw her as someone worth saving. Zara didn't know what to say, so she just stood there, staring at him. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she had thought. Marcus watched Zara closely, still unsure of what had driven him to this strange planet in the first place. He had been on a routine mission, collecting data for a space exploration program, when the distress beacon had come through. A lonely, haunting message had filtered through the system, and despite his better judgment, he had followed the signal. Now, standing in front of this alien girl, he couldn't help but wonder if fate had something bigger planned for both of them. Zara's body still trembled from the cold, her alien features pale under the harsh, unforgiving light of the planet. The fact that she had no clothes, no supplies, was almost too much for him to comprehend. She looked like a shadow of the creature she once was, broken and discarded. It was hard for Marcus to imagine that someone, some people, could leave her like this. But here she was, standing in front of him, and despite the tragedy of her situation, there was a strength in her eyes, a resilience he hadn't expected to see. He felt an unexpected urge to protect her, to right the wrongs that had been done to her. But he knew, deep down, it wasn't going to be easy. No matter what he did, it wouldn't erase the pain that she carried inside. He could only try his best to show her that there was still hope in the universe. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warmer," he said, offering a hand to Zara. Zara looked at him with a mixture of doubt and hesitation. She had been let down by so many before, and the idea of trusting another human was both frightening and unfamiliar. She had never known kindness, never experienced compassion. The cruelty of her past had molded her into someone who expected nothing but hardship. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that told her this was different. He wasn't like the others. Slowly, she took his hand, the warmth of his touch sending a surprising wave of comfort through her. She had long forgotten what it felt like to feel safe, to feel human. Together, they walked toward the small ship that Marcus had landed. Zara's bare feet scraped across the rocky ground, her skin stinging from the rough terrain, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. She was too tired, too numb. As they boarded the ship, Marcus led her to a small compartment, where a heated blanket and a spare uniform sat on a chair. "You can rest here for now. I'll check the systems and see if I can get us to a nearby station. We'll get you some real help." Zara nodded silently, her throat tight. She was exhausted, both mentally and physically, but something inside her refused to let go of the hope that had ignited when Marcus had spoken to her. It was so unfamiliar, so unexpected, that she didn't know what to make of it. She had spent so long burying the hope that it had become alien to her, like a forgotten part of herself. She hesitated before taking the blanket, feeling a strange reluctance. She had always been alone. She had never had someone care for her, never had anyone show concern for her well-being. The idea of someone wanting to help her felt like a strange dream she couldn't wake up from. As she wrapped herself in the blanket, Marcus returned, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days," he said softly. "Are you hungry?" Zara blinked, her stomach growling softly in response. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until the words left Marcus's lips. She had been so focused on survival, so caught up in the constant fear of rejection, that food had become an afterthought. Now, in this moment, her body seemed to demand it. I don't know if I can eat," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus smiled gently. "Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Just take your time." He reached into a small compartment and pulled out a ration pack, placing it in front of her. "It's not much, but it's enough to keep you going until we can get you something better." Zara stared at the pack for a long moment. It was so simple, just a small packet of food, but it felt like the most significant thing in the world. For so long, she had only known hunger, the gnawing emptiness that came with being abandoned. To have someone offer her even a small gesture of kindness, even something as small as food, was overwhelming. Slowly, she reached for the ration pack, her hands trembling as she tore it open. The first bite was slow, unsure, but the second felt more natural, almost comforting. The warmth of the food spread through her, filling the empty spaces in her body, and for the first time in a long time, she felt human again. It was an odd sensation, one she didn't know how to process. "Thank you," she whispered between bites, her voice quiet but full of meaning. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat down across from her, watching as she ate. "You're welcome," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to thank me, we're in this together now." Zara looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't fully understand. She had been alone for so long, convinced that she was worthless, that she was destined to be discarded and forgotten. But Marcus, he wasn't like the others. He wasn't rejecting her. He was giving her something she had never had before, dignity. She wanted to ask him why. Why was he doing this for her? Why was he helping someone like her? But the words caught in her throat, tangled up in the fear that she might not deserve the answer. Marcus must have sensed the question in her eyes because he spoke before she could. "I've seen too many people abandon others," he said softly. "Too many worlds turn their back on those who need help. I can't stand by and let someone suffer when I can do something about it." Zara's heart clenched at his words. She had never known a world where people helped one another out of pure kindness, where someone cared without expecting anything in return. It was a concept she couldn't wrap her mind around. She had never known such kindness, never been given such a gift. For the first time in her life, Zara allowed herself to believe, even if just for a moment, that she might have a future, that she could be more than the discarded outcast she had been led to believe she was. Marcus didn't see her as a mistake. He saw her as someone worth saving, someone worth protecting. That thought, that simple idea, began to take root in her heart, growing stronger with each passing moment. As they sat in silence, the hum of the ship's engines filling the space between them, Zara realized that for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. The days passed in a blur for Zara. The ship flew steadily through space, and with each passing moment, she began to adjust to the new routine, the new reality she found herself in. Marcus had been nothing but kind to her, his actions gentle and patient. He never rushed her, never made her feel like an outsider, even though she felt like one in every way. But somehow, with each small gesture, he made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere. Zara spent most of her time resting, trying to gather strength, but she also began to help around the ship in whatever small way she could. She learned how to operate some of the ship's systems, which gave her a small sense of accomplishment. It was something she had never felt before, the pride of doing something useful, something that mattered. Marcus didn't ask for much from her. His only request was that she stay safe and take care of herself. But Zara found herself feeling a pull, a desire to contribute, to prove that she wasn't as useless as she had once been led to believe. As the days went by, the two of them grew closer. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and slowly, Zara opened up more about her past. She told Marcus about her life before the abandonment, about her family, her race, and the cruelty that had led her to this moment. She told him about the isolation, the rejection, the constant feeling of being an outsider. Marcus listened with a quiet intensity, his gaze never wavering from her. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't judge her. He simply listened as though he was giving her space to heal, space to be heard. After she finished speaking, there was a long silence. Zara couldn't quite read Marcus's expression. He wasn't sad or pitying, but rather thoughtful. His eyes were full of understanding, though she didn't know how he could understand what she had been through. "You're stronger than you know," he said finally, his voice steady. "Most people would have given up, but you didn't. You're still here. That says a lot about you." Zara didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but hearing those words felt different from everything she had heard in the past. It was the first time someone had told her that she was strong, not broken. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alarm blaring through the ship, a sharp sound that made her jump. She looked over at Marcus, who was already moving to the control panel. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. "What's happening?" Zara asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "We're being targeted," Marcus replied quickly, his hands flying over the controls. "It's an unknown vessel. It's coming in fast." Zara's blood ran cold. She had been on the receiving end of many attacks before. Her people had never hesitated to show their cruelty. The thought of being captured, dragged back to the world that had abandoned her, made her sick to her stomach. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Stay here, I'll take care of it." Before she could protest, he was already on his way to the ship's weapon controls. Zara's mind raced, her thoughts spinning out of control. She wanted to help, to do something, anything, to prevent whatever was coming. But she didn't know how. She wasn't trained for this. She stood in the control room, her eyes glued to the screens, watching as the unknown ship closed in on them. The threat was real. She had been abandoned by her own kind before, but this was different. This time there was someone who cared about her, and now that someone was in danger. "I can't let him face this alone," she whispered to herself. With newfound determination, Zara rushed to the control room. She didn't know how much help she could offer, but she had to try. By the time she reached Marcus, he was already locking the ship into evasive maneuvers. His face was set in concentration, and his eyes flickered with the quiet focus of someone who had been in dangerous situations before. Zara's presence seemed to take him by surprise, but he didn't turn away. "Zara, what are you—" "Let me help," she interrupted, her voice firmer than she felt. "Please." Marcus hesitated, looking at her for a long moment, but then he nodded. "All right, I can't do this alone." He quickly showed her the targeting systems, and though it was complicated, Zara was a fast learner. They worked in tandem, firing at the pursuing ship, trying to push them back. Every movement felt like a fight for survival. Each blast of the weapon, each twist of the ship, felt like a fight for Zara's very life. The battle was intense, and for the first time in ages, Zara felt alive. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, pushing away the fatigue and the sorrow that had clung to her for so long. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for a future. A future with Marcus, a future where she wasn't abandoned, where she wasn't worthless. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the unknown ship relented. It backed off, retreating into the blackness of space, leaving them in silence once again. Zara's chest heaved as she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "We did it," Marcus said, turning to her with a smile. Zara couldn't stop herself from grinning. For the first time, she didn't feel like the weakest link. She felt like she had done something that mattered. "That was incredible," she said, her voice full of awe. Marcus's smile softened. "You did great. I knew you could handle it." For a moment, the two of them stood there, the tension of the battle slowly ebbing away. But the relief didn't last long. Zara knew that the danger was far from over. If anything, it had just begun. As the ship stabilized, Marcus turned to her, his expression serious. "We need to figure out who they are. I'm not letting them get close again." Zara nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She didn't know who the enemy was, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Zara sat quietly in the cockpit, her eyes glued to the star-filled window. The vastness of space was both beautiful and terrifying. She had always been taught to fear it, to see it as an empty void. But now, as she looked out at the infinite expanse, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The emptiness no longer felt like a reminder of her abandonment. It felt like an opportunity, an open canvas waiting to be painted. Beside her, Marcus worked steadily, his fingers moving over the ship's controls with practiced ease. They had been flying for hours, and the tension in the air was palpable. Though they had managed to fend off the unknown vessel, Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before more threats would come. He had no intention of letting them catch up with him again. "We're close," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "There's a station nearby. We can dock there, get some supplies, and maybe figure out who was after us." Zara nodded but said nothing. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts she wasn't sure how to process. She had been abandoned by her people, left to die alone on a planet that nobody cared about. Now she was traveling through space with a human who had shown her kindness, something she had never experienced before. It was all so overwhelming, and yet in the midst of all the chaos, she felt something stirring inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to have in a long time. Hope. It had always seemed so out of reach for her. Every time she dared to hope, it felt like the universe would slap her down, reminding her that she was nothing, that she didn't deserve a future. But now, with Marcus by her side, that feeling was growing. Maybe she could have a future. Maybe she could be more than the discarded alien no one cared about. As the station came into view, Marcus's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Prepare for docking. It won't be a luxury stop, but it'll do for now." Zara didn't say anything as she followed his instructions, her hands moving mechanically. Her mind was still in a fog, torn between the overwhelming sense of gratitude she felt for Marcus and the crushing weight of her past. She had spent so long being told she was unworthy, that she was nothing but a failure. It was hard to believe that someone would care enough to help her. As the ship docked with a soft thud, Marcus stood up, stretching his arms. All right, let's see what we can find. Stay close. Zara stood slowly, her legs still shaky from the long journey. She followed Marcus as they moved down the narrow hallway of the ship, the faint hum of the engines still ringing in her ears. The station was small but functional, its walls lined with various crates and supplies. It wasn't much, but it was a far cry from the barren planet where she had been abandoned. Marcus went to the station's terminal, typing in a few commands. There, he said, we can get some food, supplies, and maybe a few clues about who was chasing us. Zara lingered near the door, her eyes scanning the room. It was strange to be in a place like this, so different from the cold, empty planets she had known. The station was filled with the noise of distant voices, the clinking of metal, and the hum of machinery. It felt alive, bustling with activity. For a moment, Zara couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to belong somewhere, to be part of something that wasn't constantly trying to push her away. Her thoughts were interrupted when a figure approached the terminal. It was a tall man with dark hair and a rough-looking face, his clothes covered in dirt and grease. He eyed Marcus and Zara with suspicion but didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled up a chair next to Marcus, speaking in a low voice. "You're new here," the man said, his tone rough. "I don't recognize your ship." Marcus glanced up at him, his expression neutral. "We're just passing through looking for some supplies," the man grunted. "Supplies are hard to come by these days. There's been trouble around these parts. Some people aren't too happy to see strangers." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to encounter trouble here not so soon. She glanced at Marcus, whose calm demeanor didn't seem to change. He was always composed, always in control, but Zara could see the tension in his jaw. He was concerned. "What kind of trouble?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. The man leaned in, lowering his voice. "There's a group moving through the system. No one knows exactly who they are, but they're looking for something. Something rare, something valuable. And if you're carrying it, they'll find you." Zara's stomach dropped. She thought back to the attack in space, to the unknown ship that had pursued them. The idea that someone was hunting them was terrifying. "How do you know?" Marcus asked, his tone growing more serious. The man shrugged. "People talk. You'd be wise to keep your head down while you're here. Trust me, these kinds of people don't take kindly to strangers and they don't leave loose ends." Zara swallowed hard, her mind racing. She was a loose end. She was the one they were after. "We're not looking for trouble," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "We just need to restock and move on." The man studied them both for a long moment before standing up. "I'll let you, but don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the station. Zara stood frozen, her thoughts spinning. She hadn't known that danger would follow them so closely. She had only just begun to feel like she was safe, like she was moving toward something better. But now, it seemed like the world was closing in again, pushing her back into the darkness. Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure this out. No one's taking you anywhere." Zara looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't want to be the person who always needed saving. She wanted to be strong. But every time she thought she had a chance, it felt like the universe was reminding her of how fragile she was. "You don't have to protect me," she whispered. "I can take care of myself." Marcus gave her a small smile, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know you can. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let anyone hurt you." Zara's heart swelled in her chest. She had never known anyone who would fight for her like this. She had never known anyone who would care this much. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "We're in this together, Zara, no matter what happens." Zara couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closer than ever. She and Marcus had only just docked at the station, and already the air felt thick with tension. The man at the terminal had warned them, and though his words were laced with bitterness, they hadn't been idle threats. She could feel the weight of his caution in her bones. The universe was full of predators, some far worse than others. As they moved through the small, cramped station, Zara kept her gaze low, trying to stay out of sight. Marcus led the way, his steps quick and purposeful, but he also seemed on edge. His usual calm demeanor was strained, and for the first time, Zara saw the faintest signs of worry in his eyes. She wanted to reach out to comfort him, but she knew he was a man of few words, especially when it came to his own concerns. "Let's grab what we need and go," Marcus said quietly, his voice low but firm. "We don't want to stick around longer than necessary." Zara nodded, her mind still reeling from the man's warning. She hadn't expected things to move so quickly. One moment they were flying through space, free and clear, and the next they were caught in a web of uncertainty with enemies closing in on them. She wasn't used to this, used to the quiet despair of being alone, of having nothing. Now with Marcus, everything felt like it was on the verge of something. Hope, perhaps, or something worse. She couldn't tell. They entered a small supply store tucked away in one of the station's side corridors. The shelves were stocked with a variety of goods, rations, medical supplies, weapons, and some items Zara didn't even recognize. She stayed close to Marcus as he navigated through the aisles, gathering what they needed. It was strange, moving through a place like this. The hustle and bustle of the station, the voices of traders, and the busy sounds of commerce. Everything felt so different from the lonely silence of the planets Zara had known. Her fingers brushed against the edge of a crate as she walked past. It was cold and smooth, the kind of surface that felt like it belonged to a world far beyond her own. It made her think of all the places she had never been, of all the things she had never done. "Hey, Zara," Marcus called, pulling her out of her thoughts. "You okay?" She looked up to find him standing by the counter, waiting for her. He had gathered a small pile of supplies, food, water, a few medical items, and a weapon, something she hadn't seen before, sleek and unfamiliar. "Yeah," Zara answered softly, walking over to him. She could tell he was waiting for her to say more, but she wasn't sure what to say. She had never been good at expressing herself, especially when she didn't fully understand what was happening inside her. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing but kind. "Look, I know this isn't easy, but we'll get through it." Zara nodded, her throat tight. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be the one who always needed saving. But everything was happening so fast, too fast for her to process, too fast for her to keep up with. She hadn't been ready to trust again, hadn't been ready to let anyone in. But Marcus had made her believe in something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The woman behind the counter gave them a nod as they approached, her eyes flicking over Zara before settling on Marcus. Zara could feel the woman's gaze, a judgmental glance that lingered just a bit too long. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't friendly either. Zara had learned to read the subtle signs, the small shifts in body language that told her she wasn't welcome. Marcus didn't seem to notice. He placed the supplies on the counter, his focus entirely on the task at hand. "How much for these?" The woman gave him a curt answer, her eyes flicking to Zara once more. "That'll be 25 credits." Marcus handed over the payment, not hesitating. Zara's stomach tightened at the sight of the money. She had never seen so much in her life, let alone touched it. She had always lived in a world where credits were meaningless, a world where survival was the only thing that mattered. As the transaction was completed, the woman handed over the supplies and gave them a quick, almost dismissive nod. "Good luck," she muttered, turning away before either of them could say anything more. Marcus took the supplies, pausing for a moment to glance back at the woman. He didn't say anything, but Zara could tell he noticed the way she had looked at them, at her in particular. "Ignore her," Marcus said quietly as they turned to leave the store. "Some people just don't understand, but that doesn't matter." Zara didn't respond, though she appreciated his words. It was hard to ignore the way the woman had looked at her, the way she made Zara feel like she was nothing more than a burden. But she was learning to push those feelings aside. She had to. She couldn't afford to let the past define her anymore. As they made their way back to the ship, Zara's mind was still racing, trying to process everything that had happened. The station, the warning, the supplies, it all felt like too much. She wanted to go back to the safety of the ship, to the familiar hum of the engines, but she knew it wasn't enough. She knew they couldn't hide forever. "We'll need to make a decision soon," Marcus said suddenly, breaking the silence between them. "If they're after us, they'll come looking, and we can't outrun them forever." Zara looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't realized how much was at stake. The unknown ship, the warning, the people chasing them, it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting for a future, for something more than just existing. "I'm not going to let them take you back," Marcus continued, his voice firm. "I'll protect you, we'll find a way." Zara swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wasn't used to hearing words like that, words that promised safety, that promised someone would stand by her no matter what. She had never allowed herself to believe in such things, but now, with Marcus, she wanted to. She wanted to believe that she could have a future, that she could be more than the discarded outcast she had been told she was. As they reached the ship, Zara paused, her hand resting on the ship's hull. The cold metal beneath her fingers grounded her, reminded her that this was real, that they were real. They weren't just floating through space, waiting for the next disaster. They were choosing to move forward together. "We'll figure it out," Zara said, her voice quieter than usual, but it was steady, firm, together. Marcus gave her a small smile, his eyes soft. Together. As they climbed aboard the ship and set off into the stars, Zara felt a surge of hope rise within her, a hope she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. No matter what came next, she wasn't alone anymore.